Hi everyone, welcome to the final week of my tutor coding squads. Um, so today we will be looking at debugging your code and also just generally analyzing code. So I've got a scenario where I've taken some codes that I did with another student quite a while ago, um, and we're basically gonna have a look at it and try and essentially make sense of it. So it has some comments, but a little there's probably some areas that are slightly unclear. Um, so we're basically going to first think about how do we read the code, how do we make sense of it that way, and then look at what tools we have, because there are some really good tools we have to read code and sort of understand exactly what's happening in it. Um, and then we're also going to see if there's any issues with the code and then seeing if we can try and solve them using the debugger and using any sort of other debugging techniques. We'll cover a few different techniques, and hopefully through that you should be a bit more prepared for when you have some errors in your programs to know exactly what to do to try and fix them. Okay, right, so let's have a look at this code. Just need to share my screen. Yeah, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Um, if they're directly related to what we're doing, then I'll answer them straight away as soon as I see the chat. I'm sort of checking it every 2 minutes or so. And if not, if they're sort of more general questions, I'll answer them towards the end in the final 15 minutes, which is dedicated for questions and answers. Okay, so you should be able to see this on my screen now. So this is a sort of a penalty shootout game. So I gave this task to one of my students a while ago, and I'll just explain what the task is, and then we can have a look at sort of the solution me and the students sort of created together. So, okay, so basically, if you're not aware of how a penalty shootout works, so this is sort of in football. You generally have, I think in this case, yeah, we have 5 rounds. So in a normal penalty shootout, you have 5 rounds, and at the end of the 5 rounds, if one team has scored more than the other, then that team wins. If at the end of those 5 rounds, it's equal, then you will have to go to sudden death, and it's the first team to score, and when the other team misses, that wins the shootout. I mean, there are also scenarios where, for instance, if one team scores the first 3 penalties and the other team misses the first 3, then they would automatically win. I don't think we've accounted for this here, but we can potentially add that in as well. But that just makes it a little bit more complicated. Anyway, so what I basically said here is that each player is going to have a rating that determines how likely they are to score. So it's a fairly simple rating system. If they have a rating of 1, they only have a 1 in 10 chance of scoring. But if they have a rating of 10, they have 100% chances of scoring. So now the catch is that I'm not sure if I specified it here, but the price of a player is 3 times their rating. I think I've said that down here. Yeah, there we go. Price equals score times 3. So obviously you have a limited budget that you can spend on players, so that's 100 tokens. So if you were to get 3 players that cost 30 tokens each, then you'd have to make up the remaining 7 players from 10 tokens, which would be impossible here. Because even if you got 7 players of rating 1, they would each cost 3. 3 tokens, so that would be 21 tokens, so you wouldn't have enough. So yeah, basically you need to choose the best team you can make, and then according to those probabilities we determine if the player actually scores the penalty. And you're playing against a computer. Now I've just simplified this here and basically assume that each player has, I think, a set probability scoring, I think, of 3/10. Might have to check that, but I think it was 3/10. Basically just to, yeah, 3/10 there. So just basically to make sure that they're within the rules, because if we had the AI team choosing their own players from the list, that would be quite tricky to manage. So anyway, once the user's players have been picked, we simulate the penalty shootout, do some nice print statements so that the user knows what's going on. And then we see who wins, basically. That's pretty much it. So let's have a look through the code. So we're importing random and importing time. And then we defined a player class. And this may be new to a few of you. So this init function is basically the constructor method. So this is a class, and classes have methods and attributes. So we can see here that we have 2 methods, because we can see that we've used def twice to define 2 different functions. The constructor basically assigns values to each of the attributes, which we can see here: player ID, price, and score. And then we have another function that basically takes a penalty. And it calculates whether they've scored or they haven't. And that just uses random numbers. So don't worry too much if you're a little bit confused on what's happening here, because if you've never seen object-oriented programming before, this might be a bit confusing. But essentially you can think of objects as having attributes and methods, and an object is just a thing or a person or anything like that. So in this case it's a player, and a player has a price, they have an ID to identify themselves uniquely, and a score. And that player can take a penalty. That is the player class. Now, a useful tip here, if I just change the tab I'm sharing, a useful tip if you're not really sure when you're reading a code of what is happening here, there's a few things you can do. So if we just go onto browser, so if I just Google classes in Python, as we can see here, there's a class defined. If I didn't know what a class was, this what comes up. So I think a website I've recommended before is W3 Schools. So we go into Python classes, and then you have all this different information about a class. You've got examples, it's really useful, and explains what the init function is, the constructor method. And I think one of the most useful things about it is you've got this try it editor. So it'll run some code in here, and you can see if you change certain things, what happens. So like if we change the name passed into this constructor to be Mary, and we change the age to be 25, then we can see that eventually, because it's a bit slow, Mary and 25 gets printed, and we're printing them by doing the object name p1 dot name and dot age, like that. And you can add some more code as well to sort of mess around with it and try and make sense of what's happening. But this is a really useful tool. Now, another tool you can use is, of course, ChatGPT. Now, what I'd say, if I just change the screen capture again, what I'd say about ChatGPT, because I'm sure all of you will have used it by now. What I'd say is, I just I'll use this later. What I'd say about it is, don't expect it to write all your code for you. If you have a task in mind and you should be thinking through this task yourself. You shouldn't be thinking, right, I'm going to get AI to plan it all and write it all. What I personally use AI for is a few limited things. So I will still plan everything myself. I will then write the code myself, but there's a few things that I can do. So firstly, if I need to do something very repetitive, so I'll give you an example. If I had to write if I had to write the same sort of code but with slight differences, yeah, actually, I'll use a slight different example because that's not a great practice. But yeah, okay, I'll give you a good example from one of my projects. I had to create a password generator, and this wasn't like the main thing in the project. It was just one of the things I had to do. Now, I could create a password generator. It would probably take me half an hour. But it's a very straightforward task. If you give it to an AI, it will know exactly what you're asking for. So I thought, okay, well, I just need a function that will do it for me. So I just put that into ChatGPT and copy it over, and that saves me half an hour. That's when it's really useful. Another scenario where it's really useful is through reading code. So I'll just copy some of this code, the player class, and I'm just going to say, explain this code. So as you can see, it's sort of breaking it down into the different parts. Just wait for it to finish. So we can see here that it explains that class player defines a class, and then it explains what the constructor method, and it explains what the init method is, and exactly what it's doing. And then it takes this penalty method and explains what that is doing. And obviously, the difference between this and say something like W3 Schools is that it will give you specific answers to your problem. Now, this is probably it's a far more powerful tool than Google could ever be, because it basically you don't really need to give it very much. You can just literally give it your code and ask us a brief question on it. So it's really powerful, really useful, but you kind of don't want to become reliant on it, and you don't want to be using it for things you don't need to use it for. So only really use it when it's really necessary, I'd say. So in this case, when you're trying to understand some code, don't sit there and struggle and think, I have no idea what this is, and I'm going to just ignore it. Think, okay, look at some articles, and if I'm not really sure what to Google, then ChatGPT is a great thing of identifying exactly what exactly what you need to understand. And then through this, I could decide I need to ask some more questions. So like, give me an example of another class for an animal. So let's say I wasn't quite sure about how to define a class, what a class does. I can create another example, ask it to make me that, and it will basically just sort of create the same sort of things you'll see in the W3 Schools article, and you can interact with it as well. But there is still a need for the W3 Schools article because Yeah, as I showed you before, there's certain tools in there that maybe you don't quite have in ChatGPT, like the code editor and running that. And also you'll probably generally find it's better written. So for the standard examples, I find that it's probably a little bit better explained on W3 Schools, and the layout's nicer and everything. Yeah, but this is also pretty good as well for learning about these things. Okay, I'll come back to this in a minute because there are other uses of ChatGPT that I haven't mentioned here that will really save you a heck of a lot of time. So we'll come back to that in a minute. So let's just go back to the penalty game. Okay. Right. Okay, so we've looked at the player class, and then we've got a few bit more code down here. So we've got a function called generate players. Now, thankfully, this is named quite nicely. It tells me I'm going to generate some players. Now, what am I generating? Maybe I need a comment for that. So let's have a look at this. I can see that I'm randomly generating a score here. I'm then creating the price. I'm then appending this player object to the players list, and I'm incrementing an ID, and then I'm returning the players. So let's say generate a list of 40 players, and each player has, what does each player have? It has a random score between 1 to 10, price is 3 times the score, and then the player ID is incremented each time. So if you want to, you can display it like this, or you could display it like that with the comments next to each line of code. I'd probably recommend doing it like this, having the comments separate from the code, because otherwise it can get a little bit difficult to read. Okay, but now that is a lot more readable, and we should be able to just come to this straight away and be able to fully understand what each player is going to have, how many players can be generated, and why we're doing it. Okay. So we get down here, we're calling the generate players function to generate the players. Then we are printing something. We're printing the ID, printing the price, printing the score of every player. That is fairly self-explanatory, so we don't really need to comment there. Because if you do too many comments, it does get a bit difficult to read. And then we can see we've got the user team, the amount of money we have, the number of people we've picked. And then this is a little bit chaotic down here, so this is probably what needs the most attention. So I've got some comments that I've left from later, basically saying what I need to do. So you can see I'm straight away looking at this and I'm thinking there's a lot of text here. I need to understand what's going on. So I have a few options here. I can obviously just spend the time reading, or I can put it into an AI, but I think it's important to practice reading code, so you don't want to become reliant on AI to be able to read it. So let's just go through it line by line and practice that reading of code. So let's just replace this. So we can see here we're doing while picked is less than 10. So that tells me I'm going to pick 10 players. We know that already. And then letting the user choose the player. If the user can afford the player, add the player to the user's team, take the price from the budget. Let's get rid of this. So we don't need that. X equals P equals 1. You have this amount of money. And then, yeah, in the else part, we have you don't have enough money for that player. Do you want to restart or keep picking? And then we can choose to restart, or if we choose to keep picking, nothing happens, we just continue. And if we choose to restart, everything gets reset. So this will work in the event that we run out of money. And then down here after this, let's probably leave this for now, but we've got, so I need to go on to sort of the debugging part of the session. We've got the generation CPU team, which is fairly self-explanatory. So I mentioned, put as a note here, we can make this more advanced later using AI, which is probably a lot more possible now than it was when I created this for my student about a year ago. So yeah, we've been through that. We generated 10 players, each of rating 3. And then we got the actual game playing part, which just basically calls the penalty function to work out if the user scored the penalty or not. Print scores or misses and all that. And then we work out who's won. And then it ends. That's pretty much it. So okay. So let's look at the main part of the session, and that is using a debugger. So there are 2 main debugging techniques, and they are basically using print statements or using a debugger. And I think most people use print statements because it is a bit simpler to do. So essentially, if I'm trying to understand what's happening, let's say it's in, let's say there's a problem here in this while loop on line 56. I might decide, well, I want to print the value of picked here. And I might do something like this. Number of players picked is that, something. And that would now print that in the loop. So we could see every time how many players have been picked, and we could just basically make sure that the variable picked is working as expected. So that might be something we suspect. However, I do prefer to use a debugger, and I'll show you how this works now. So if you're using VS Code, if you go to the top right corner, you've got 3 options when you click this button here. Run code, run Python file, debug Python file. So if we click debug, so we can see now that everything's printed in the terminal, just as if you ran the code. And we got this sort of UI here for, like, there's a pause button, there is a step over button, step into, step out, restart, and stop. So essentially that allows us to step through our code. So if we pause here, and let's just enter like ID 39. Okay. This is really cool. We can see now which line we are at. So we're on line 58. If I just expand this and let's go through another line, we can see all the variables. Okay, so we're at line 59. We are currently appending the player that the user has picked to user team. And we can see the state of the different variables we have. So currently we have 100 money, 100 tokens. We have 39, 39 is our pick. So we just enter 39. Picked is 0 because we haven't picked any players yet. And then we can also see the players list as well. If we open this, This looks horrible, but it's just because it's basically an object. But we can see here the different attributes of the object. And we can see that for every player as well. So this is really useful when you have an error and you're trying to work out what are the values of the variables at different points in your program. So if we know that an error occurs in this if statement, for instance, we can step through each line and see how the variables change. So we can see if we step through here, user team should get an item. And it does. So we can now see ID 39, price 24, score 8 has been added. And then if we step over this line, we should expect money to have players pick price taken away from it. So if we just make sure that should be 24, so what's set here, that should be taken away from 100. So money should now become 76, and it does. So we can see there's no issue there at all. And then picked equals picked plus 1, adds 1 to picked. And then we have the print statement, and it goes back to the while loop. So hopefully you can see there exactly how we can check if we have an issue in our code. So by stepping through each line, we can see how the different variables change, and then think, okay, what were we expecting to happen on each line to the different variables, and then what has actually happened. And if we see there's a difference between the expected and the actual values, then we got a problem. I mean, we can see why does it change in a different way to how we expected. And then we need to fix where this led to that different change. So I think this is a lot more powerful than a much more efficient way of doing things than using print statements. Now, lots of people do use print statements, that's fine, but I personally think being able to view all the variables at once and seeing how they change on each line means the process is a lot quicker. We're not putting in loads of different print statements at different points. We've just got it all there. We can just step through, view the variable values. No need to spend time thinking where do we need to put a print statement in. We just need to think where do we run our code between. So there's a few extra things with a debugger you need to know. So I've mentioned variable. This is called variable watch, where we can see the different variables, and we've looked at stepping through code. One thing we haven't looked at, just stop this, is breakpoints. So breakpoints point in your program that the debugger will run until, and then it will stop. So for instance, if we know that all this is fine, so up until line, say, 59, it all works okay. We've tested all that. Then what we can do is let's run the debugger, and it will run all the way up until line 59, or up until any inputs. So it's asked me for the ID, so I'll have to put the ID in. So let's put 20, and then it stops on line 59. And we can even put in multiple breakpoints. So let's say I think I can put one in live. Let's say we just want to check what the state of the program is on 59, and then we know there's no problems between 59 and 62. We just want to then run till then, and it will do that. So we can skip over those lines, or alternatively, we could just run one line at a time. Yeah. If not, it will just run between breakpoints. Yeah. And that makes it a lot easier to just test the particular areas of your program that you want to test. Let's stop that. Okay. So let's look at some other tools then. So I mentioned about using AI for other things. with your code. So it's really useful actually in the debugging process. So I wouldn't say it's really useful for just, okay, my code isn't working, tell me what I need to fix. Because if you've got quite a complex error, it may not be able to take into account everything, because it might sort of miss something you've done and then change something, and actually it now doesn't sort of fulfill the requirements that you originally set. It maybe fails a certain rule that your requirements set, and the AI doesn't know that, and it will just get things wrong. So, and quite a lot. So you do have to bear this in mind. So if we just change to ChatGPT again. Let's create a new chat. Okay, I'm just gonna quite simply copy and paste my code in here. Actually, I think I did this earlier. Let's try doing this. Yeah. Yeah. So I just generally asked it explain what this code does and also point out any errors. Now I do sort of urge a bit of caution with this. If you're giving it a lot of code, it may get some things wrong, but it is good to just get a general idea of what's happening, but then you must check this with your own knowledge and read over the code yourself and see, does that match up with what the AI is telling you, because it will get some things wrong sometimes. So it's given me a step-by-step breakdown of what's happening in the code, which is really useful. So then I can sort of cross-check that with the code and what I think it does. And it's also pointed out some errors, which now it won't point out an exhaustive list of errors. It's not an error checker, but it's quite good with just identifying some validation you need in your code. So you see here, like it's pointed out an potential index out of range error when I'm selecting users. It's pointed some other things out. So it points out some validation that I might need to do. So it's a good starting point, I'd say, when identifying things you need to fix. I think probably the best use of AI that I have come across with regards to coding, I haven't got a specific example in here, but if you were watching last week with some elite code problems we did, you quite often with elite code problems, and to be fair with anything in coding, have scenarios where you're stuck on a very small error. You're not exactly sure which line of code is doing it. It might be you're missing a bracket, or you're missing one small thing that wouldn't be very easy to see, and you'd have to really closely read your code. So it might just be a typo or something. That is the best thing about AI, that I don't have to spend like an hour or two of my life now looking for that really small error. I can just put this into an AI and say, I'm getting this error. What is it? And quite often it will say, yeah, on line 20, you need to put a bracket there. Now, I mean, the IDE will do this most of the time anyway. So like, IntelliSense is quite good in just, like if I put an extra bracket, it shows me there. It highlights in red. You need to remove that bracket. But there are scenarios where the syntax is actually correct, but there's a logic error. IDEs won't spot this, but AI will do, sometimes anyway. Yeah, that is a really useful scenario. There's a lot of useful scenarios with it. So what I'd say with regards to AI is only use it when you need to. Don't use it to write massive blocks of code and do all your work for you. It's used as an assistant. So it's used to take away those menial tasks that you used to spend hours doing, but now you can do in a few minutes. GPT-4. So I haven't really used GPT-4 much at all. So yeah, I'm just on the free version there. So I'm not really sure whether how to answer it. I mean, I guess if you're using AI a lot for whatever you're doing, maybe maybe you're working on a project that's using ChatGPT, then yeah, maybe using GPT-4, maybe getting a subscription might be worth it then. But generally, I think most of us here will be just using it sort of casually to do fairly basic things, because I'd say this is basic stuff for an AI. There's a lot more complicated stuff that will do, but so yeah, it depends what you're doing. Yeah, this is the last lesson. Yeah, yeah, sad. But yeah, I mean, all the lessons are available on demand. So if you've missed any at all, you can just go back through them all. But yeah, I mean, we've got a few minutes left, so I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. I mean, another useful thing. So I did this earlier with another student actually. So I was doing a LeetCode problem. I created a really quite horrible solution, which you can see here. This is more complicated than you don't really need to understand what's going on, but it's kind of good in simplifying code, but it does get things wrong. Like I just, because we were looking at another solution for a that someone had created that was a lot simpler than what I originally created, and I ask it to simplify the code, and it creates it gets it quite similar to what this other person had done, but there's a few differences. So it's quite good that I wouldn't have to spend hours and hours getting it to this point. And you've got a starting point then with sort of fixing some of these issues and maybe changing a few things around to make it work. So I think with AI, don't rely on it working. Don't just copy and paste code, but yeah, it's good as sort of to save you a bit of time with certain things. But as I said, don't rely on it and don't get it to do everything for you, because then you never learn anything. Yeah, how much does it cost to get a My Tutor? Yeah, the prices vary quite a bit. So I think it starts from £25 on the website. So there should be links in the description about. Yeah, I think there is a link in the description about getting an appointment to potentially get a tutor. So, but if you still can't find it through the links, just go to the My Tutor website. You can find all the tutors on there, and there's also a live chat function as well, so you can use that to ask any questions you need. So it's pretty easy to find out information, really. So yeah. Yeah, if anyone else has any other questions at all, feel free to get them in the chat. Happy to answer. I've got probably about 5 minutes left. Basically, yeah. I think there's certain subjects where it's not that easy to tell you how to practice, but I think with coding, it's pretty straightforward how to know. Like, basically think about anything that interests you and think about, could you write a program, create a system to to do that. Like for instance, you can probably see from the background, I've got like all sorts of Libball memorabilia. So I've created like programs, like simulators for like different things with Libball. It might be like fixture simulators or something. Find something you're interested in. See, could I use my skills to do that? And if it's something you're interested in, I think you want to continue with it, because if you create something that at the end you actually quite like to use, then you're going to be really proud of what you created, and you're going to really have some motivation to get to that point. So yeah, it is just practice. Think about projects you can do. If you want to try online coding sites like LeetCode, or there's many out there, then yeah, do that. What did I get for my A level? So I did maths, computer science, and third maths. So I got A star in maths and A's in the others. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I can definitely recommend computer science GCSE and A level, if you're interested at all in programming, or I guess everyone watching this will be. Then it's a very good thing. And if you've already got coding experience, then it's going to help with a lot of the content. Okay. Yeah, if you want to do a GCSE coding question very quickly, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, if you just give me one moment. I'm just gonna quickly get the paper up. So I think I did this in lesson 6. I'm not sure if you were watching it or not, but there are some examples in there. So I think I took them from the 2021 paper. So I'll just see if there's some from the 2020 paper we can very quickly go over. Yeah. Okay. I'll just do this free VS Code, I think. Let's change to VS Code. Okay. Right. So the question is 6 marks. So we're told a school uses an array to call an attendance register every morning. And we need to write an algorithm using iteration, so that's like using loops, to display the name of each student one at a time from student names. So this is an array containing students. Take an input whether that student is present or absent, and display the total number of present students and total number of absent students in a suitable message after all of them have been displayed. So we'll have student names already defined, so we don't really need to define that. But we're told we're going to use iteration. We're going to go through every student one at a time. So therefore, we're going to use a for loop, as we know how many students there are. It would just be the length of student names. So don't worry about the yellow underlining. It's just because student names hasn't been defined, but we don't need to define it, or it will already been defined in an earlier question. So we're tracking whether the student is present or absent. So we're going to need to keep a total of how many students are present, how many students are absent. I'm sorry, I'm rushing through this a little bit. Just able to finish it in time. So go for every student, and we're going to ask is the student present? And this is going to be an input. If present is yes, we'll put yes or no. Then we add one to present. Else, add one to absent. And then at the end, we're going to print the number of present students and the number of absent students. And it says a suitable message, so that's why I'm writing the text number of present, number of absent. Yeah. That's basically it. Yeah. Do you have any questions about that? Displaying the name of the student. Yes, that's a good point. You need to do that. So we'll do that here. Let's do student names. And if let's just define student names so it will actually work. So let's do student names Michael. James, Eric. Let's just do that. Just stop sharing for a moment. Yeah. Right, so I'll just save this and then run it. Let's share my screen again. Yeah, I just stopped sharing temporarily because it brings up like File Explorer and stuff. Yeah. Okay, so let's say Michael's present. What have we done there? What line's that? Present plus equals 1. Okay, that's a... Oh, right. Yeah, I've used the same variable name. Let's do that. Apologies about that. Say no, no, yes. Should be 2 and 2. And there we go, 2 and 2. Okay, so yeah, it works as expected. Okay, do you have any questions about that at all? So what line are you referring to? Ah, yeah, right. So that's basically printing the student's name, and then we concatenate that together with the question. Yeah, so basically that's joining up strings to become one string. So you can. I think you said in the previous lesson that you did it slightly differently, which is fine. But that's just another way of doing it. That's the way I usually print multiple strings as one. Yeah. Does that make sense? No, if you don't use pluses, it won't work. So, like, a common mistake would be to use commas, but it will give you an error because it will think they're parameters. So no, you do need to use pluses in the way I've done it anyway to join them up. Yeah. Okay. If you don't have any other questions, then I think we'll end it there. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining the sessions the last 8 weeks. Yeah, I mean, thanks Mohammed for all the interaction in the sessions. It's definitely made the sessions a lot better. Line 18. So what about line 18? So I've used pluses between all the strings. There is a oh no, I mean I'll show if you want me to show you. It gives me an error here. What's the error? Yeah, it just gives me a syntax error. It's just not correct really. Yeah. So if you use f string, yeah, that's a perfectly valid way of doing it. Yeah, that's fine. So both ways do it the same way. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Last chance for questions. Just give it about 10 seconds. So I know there's a slight delay. Cool. Yeah, thanks for my head. All right. Thanks everyone.